Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of our security, compliance, and an identity live Q&As. My name is Gareth Boyle, the Senior Marketing Executive for Microsoft and Fusion 5, and I'm joined today by our presenter, Senior Consultant Troy Gerber. Before we get started, just a quick couple of bits of housekeeping. The first 40 minutes of today's session, you'll hear from our presenter on identity and endpoint management, and the final 20 minutes will act as our Q&A session. If you do have any questions, you'll see an option to submit them up the top right-hand side of your screen. So please feel free to use it at any time during the presentation, and we'll address those questions at the end of the session. We'll also send you out a copy of the recording after the session as well to answer all of your questions asked. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first presenter, Troy.
Thanks, Gareth. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session. Today, we're going to be covering identity and endpoint management. Just from an agenda perspective, quick introduction to the session and to myself. We'll have a look at why this is important to us, and then we'll do a bit of a shallow dive into identity management and endpoint management. I'll go through the topics, and we'll close off with a couple of call to actions and where we can go to next. Just from a perspective, myself, my name is Troy Gerber. I'm based out of the Fusion 5 Auckland offices. I specialize in Microsoft 365, specifically modern work and application security in the M365 stack. Today's session is what Microsoft term a level 100 session. So we're looking at high level topics. We'll be looking at overviews and then going through some of the things that we can do in the endpoint and identity space. This is not a technical session. There won't be any technical deep dives, and we'll try and avoid too many acronyms and bad dad jokes. In the session we had previously, we covered security and compliance, just from a bigger picture point of view where security and compliance fits in. From overall security posture, we look at security, compliance, identity management, and endpoint management as a bit of a holistic guideline. Each of these have their place in our security posture, and in some cases, they actually cross over and are complementary. For today's session, we've been looking at identity management and endpoint management specifically. Just to position the bigger picture, and I love analogies, so we'll work with that. What we're looking at is consider your company as a physical place or a virtual building that exists somewhere, and inside that, from a security point of view, we have to have a security posture that protects the information that we have inside our organization. So that's sort of the first step, and we looked at that last week on why you should do that and what are the considerations you should have from a planning point of view. Secondly, in last week's session, we looked at data, how we actually discover data in our organization and ensure the data is compliant, and also to be able to retrieve the data and get more information from that. So we're in a house, we have a security posture, we're making sure people can't come in, we've found the data we want to work with, and today we're going to take the next steps. So within any organization, we also have a lot of applications that we work with. Some of them are Microsoft based, some of them aren't, some of them are bespoke, some of them on premise, some of them are cloud based. Those applications need to be secure as well, and we also need to ensure that the right people are accessing those applications. As my lovely diagram shows, some of those people might be sitting inside our organization, inside that blue circle, and be protected by physical security and the idea that they're on premise, and some of them are working from home or working from a airport lounge in Dubai, for we know. And this is one of the areas that we're going to focus on today, is how we can look at how we can protect those people and ensure they have access to the applications. Those applications are protected as well. And the whole idea is we want to protect them from bad actors. So the focus for today's sessions is going to be how we can stop bad actors from attacking people and pretending they are somebody else in the outside world, and also looking at how we can actually protect those endpoints, the devices that people are using to access the data in our organization. So we'll cover from an identity point of view, identity challenges for today's organizations, why we should actually be considering identity management, and then we'll look at some of what we can do. Across the board, we'll position this from a Microsoft perspective. So even though the concepts, ideas are standard security posture across any industry, across any technology, our end goal from a Microsoft partner point of view is to see what Microsoft can bring to the table to actually help us address these needs. In the endpoint space, we'll have a look at what an endpoint is, and then how we actually protect our endpoints. The upside of this presentation from a content point of view is that identity management and endpoint management sometimes blur. So a lot of the concepts and methodologies that we look at from both sides tend to be in both. And we'll try and skip over the ones where there's duplication and focus just on the ones that are important for today's session. That said, let's jump straight into looking at why we should care. We covered this in the last session as well, but these are the fundamentals. Breaches are costly. As much as we'd like to not spend a lot of money on things, if there's a breach, it can be very expensive. Not only from a point of view of you being non-compliant and potentially having to pay fines for data breaches, but also from a reputational point of view. The fact that your business now has been shown to have data breaches, customers don't feel safe that the information is still inside the organization, that you can actually protect the data you have with them. Also, why you should care is it's about data management. If we can manage data and information, if you know what's there, how people are getting to it, and our security is, we have a much better posture internally as well as externally. There's been a lot of examples in the news recently about data breaches and how they actually got breached. We aren't going to deep dive into those, but it's almost become a bit of a norm that on a regular basis we see either small or large organizations having some form of breach. And in many cases, these are because of things like endpoints not being secure or people's credentials being compromised. So let's look at identity management and the factors that play in that, and why we need to worry about it and what we can do about it. So the challenges around identity management is the explosion of apps, devices, and users outside of our corporate network. This has become incredibly relevant and very prevalent in the last year and a half. I think COVID has become the #1 reason why we do things nowadays. But the reality is that we're working from home, we're working on bring your own devices, we're working from tablets, we're working from a laptop we bought at the store when our work laptop died during COVID and we couldn't be back to the office. So from an applications perspective and from a devices perspective, a lot of these are sitting outside of our network. We control them, and we need to know who's accessing that device that is accessing our network. So that's one of the big reasons why we want to make sure that we know the identity of the person using that device. There has been an increase in identity attacks, and in many cases a lack of visibility. And one of those reasons for lack of visibility is because these attacks are happening outside of a platform that we tend to have control of. One of the #1 attack surfaces for bad actors to get into company data is by impersonating somebody else. And once you impersonate that role, you have a much better chance of actually getting into the organization and performing a more robust attack. There is evolving compliance regulations with data privacy. This is something we actually discussed in the previous session as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of these security stances tend to blend into each other. But as compliance changes, being able to retrofit identity mechanisms to make sure they match those compliance requirements is critical and key as well. Not only because we need to be compliant, but because if we're not, there is a potential breach scenario, as well as the potential risk of having some sort of monetary penalty if we are in breach. And then once again, demands on productivity and monetization has increased massively. Once again, the last year and a half have shown this. We need to be more productive. We need to think of new ways of working. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that the people that are doing the work, we can identify them, give and know and allow them to do what they need to do in a productive way. To cite an example here from our Fusion 5 perspective, even though we're Australia and New Zealand based, we use employees that are outside of our borders as well, that typically would have been on-prem or in country, but due to COVID, they are working remote. We need to know that those remote workers are secure. We need to know that they are actually the people they say they are, even though they're coming to us from a different geolocation or different time zone. And ensuring their identities are protected and we can validate them is critical to that. And then From an organizational point of view, when it comes to identity, we have multiple access points and applications that people need to be identified against before they can actually access the data they work with. This diagram has a whole bunch of circles, and if you look around them, some of them are very recognizable. The Windows environment, Mac, Android, iOS. There are a couple of smaller ones. I'll point out like things like smartwatches, IoT devices. We have multiple attack surfaces in a sense that people can access. Not only do we need to protect that at the endpoint, but we also need to make sure the identity of the person using that endpoint to access our environment is secure. And this is where Microsoft Azure Active Directory comes in as a central management environment for that identity. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail in the next 2 or 3 slides. So what must we do to protect identities? First of all, recommendation is connect all apps to a secure single sign-on. So with multiple applications and systems, both on-premise, in our own cloud, potentially in other cloud systems, with multiple identity providers and different usernames, different passwords, it becomes a bit of a nightmare. And it becomes a thing where bad practice is taking place. Having the same password for multiple accounts, because it's easy to remember than 15 different passwords. Putting things into a password chain, writing it down, having a my passwords file creates a scenario where your identity can very easily be compromised if people get that information or get access to an application or system. So by having a single environment where you can manage the user's identity and use that identity to propagate to all the different systems they use for single sign-on, gives you a single attack surface, single monitoring surface, and a single way to ensure that the person who's coming in is the person is the person that they say they are. From a practical point of view, turn on multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is one of the easiest things to turn on. And it's one of the things that we tend to find with a lot of clients is not turned on by default for a lot of different reasons. But MFA actually accounts can prevent up to 99% of identity hacks. If you have the second level of authentication, it's very easy to actually work with that. And we'll have a look at some of the authentication options for MFA in a slide or two. One of the excuses, or one of the reasons for companies say that enabling MFA is difficult for them is the change management. That if I enable MFA, people will need to learn how to do it, and then they have to re-authenticate and configure phones, etc. This is practically not true. If you think about every single one of our employees that has a bank application is more than happy to enable MFA, yet we tend to push back and not want to do it in an organization. So getting MFA on is going to be a massive jump in your security posture when it comes to identity protection. Next is automatic block thefts with conditional access, and we'll deep dive a bit into conditional access. But the idea behind conditional access is that depending on different scenarios, and we'll play through a few of them, I will not allow somebody to access the information that's sitting inside my environment. One of the more common used examples is if I detect that the person trying to log on is in a country that is outside of the borders of where we operate, and I know I don't have any employees that are in those countries, I can say, sorry, you're not inside of New Zealand or Australia. I'm not going to allow you to log on because geographically it doesn't make sense that you can be there. Other scenarios will be based on you're logging on to an application and I see that you're in country, but you're using a device that is running an operating system that I know has a security vulnerability and I don't want to allow you to in. So I'm actually going to block access or limit your access. And we'll talk to that in a bit more detail. Next, monitor and respond to identity in real time with real-time decisions. And this is one of the upsides of working with the identity protection suite inside of Microsoft's identity protection, is that we can actually monitor in real time and actually make decisions proactively. And one of those proactive decision-making tools is things like conditional access. So don't wait until we've allowed the person in and then try and remediate afterwards. We actually make a decision when it happens. This monitoring capability is actually provided by the Microsoft suite when it comes to identity management. And then last but not least, manage and control access for all users and privileged accounts. A very bad practice from years ago was to create an admin account or global admin account, and it became something we swapped around. Us IT people tend to be the naughtiest people when it comes to sometimes with password management. It was easy just to go down to the guy in the IT help desk and quickly get access. So we want to make sure that privileged accounts are protected, and we also want to make sure that when somebody needs to access something that's privileged, that we control how long they access it, and we can actually then dispose of that access once they're done based on certain actions as well. And this is what number 5 looks at, and this is a facility provided by the Identity Suite for Microsoft as well, is to actually have privileged control access, or to actually only give access to things like global admin accounts or to a role for a limited time period, and then able to monitor when the role has been used and when the person logs off, and then clear that access. We won't be going into deep dive on that today, just pointing out as one of the areas we want to focus on. From a bit more of a deep dive perspective, let's look at the application management side. Mentioned that one of the first steps we want to look at is making sure that all the applications we have are managed through a single identity provider. In this case, Azure Active Directory acts as our single identity provider, providing a single sign-on experience. As this slide dictates or shows, we can even go and connect to services such as SaaS apps that live inside of the cloud environment, and not only the Microsoft application framework, so Dropbox, Salesforce, Microsoft, etc. We can use Azure Active Directory to provide the single sign-on experience into cloud-hosted other services. So if we connect to something like Google Drive or AWS, still have a single controlled extended experience through Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory will also scale down to our on-premise environment, so we can link it to our Active Directory on-prem, and also use it as an authentication mechanism for on-premise and web applications that live in the more traditional space. And we can also use it to create app boundaries, where we can put a whole bunch of applications that provide a similar functionality or in a similar role into app buckets. In the example on the left, we have HR apps, where we basically put Workforce, Oracle, Capital Management into one bucket, and then we have our security posture around there from an identity perspective as well.
Maybe just cover the most recent slide there.
Yeah. Did we do multi-factor?
We did. I did hear that, etc.
Okay, cool. So let's jump to the next one. So this is one of my favorite ones, just because it's really cool tech, and that's conditional access. So I'll let you read the top of the slide, but basically conditional access is where I can set conditions that based on the posture of that person, and there's a lot of different parameters we configure, and I'll go through that. And I can decide based on these different conditions if the person has access to information. So some of these we can use as location and user-based conditional access. So depending where you are, I might not let you into my network or use that as a decision point. Device-based conditional access. So depending on the device you're accessing from, I'll make a decision around which application you want to access, and also risk-based. So let's take that through a couple of scenarios, and I'll use the next slide to do that. So here's the scenario we have. We have a gentleman sitting in an airport in Dubai trying to log onto the corporate network. His laptop has been destroyed by it. It fell out of his briefcase, and he goes to the local internet cafe or a public device and logs on. Types in username and password because he goes to office.com, and it says, right, I don't know where you are. You're in Dubai. I expect you not to be in Dubai. So I'm going to send you a multi-factor authentication request, and that's great. He accepts that. So we think, fine, that's a good conditional access control. We've done the authentication, but now it looks at the fact that it knows where I am. It's done the MFA, and it says, but let me look at the device you're on. I see that you're using Windows, using the Edge browser on a Windows 10 device that is not on my network. You're now sitting in a public network using a browser that's been accessed by any amount of people, and I don't know what you're doing with it. So I'm going to add a conditional tick that says, no, if you're using this device, I can either let you in or not let you in, even though I know I'm happy to know who you are. I don't trust the device platform. So at this level, I can decide if I want to completely restrict access based on that condition, that the device is not a secure device, or I can say I'll let you in, but I'll only let you into certain applications, and this is where the application profile kicks in. So I will let you into the corporate intranet, so you can do lookups and find information, but I'm not going to allow you to access the ERP system in the background. I'm not going to let you access our line of business system. I'm not going to let you access finance and operations. So you can take all these different signals and you use conditional access policies to build these different signals up. And once you've got your conditional access and you've done your real-time risk assessment, you can then make a decision on what you want to do. So allow access, maybe require a second level authentication, limit access or block access. And once that decision has been made, then push the person back into the data. A very practical way of using this, if you have a work from home scenario, and at Fusion 5 we do that, if I plug my laptop into the corporate network on the corporate Wi-Fi and I access our intranet or any of our business applications, it'll let me through straight away just with the username and password. If I'm at home like I am today and I log on, I'm going to get a challenge response because conditional access will detect that I'm not on the corporate network, and I'll say our rule is if you're in New Zealand, not on corporate network, but on a managed device, which is my laptop, that I will just ask you for MFA to make sure that you are the person you say you are and you have your phone with you. And in my case, we use Authenticator app, so it has to be Authenticator app based. And if you can fulfill those two conditions, I'm going to let you through. And that's a more very practical day-to-day scenario when it comes to using conditional access. One of my favorite things because you can do quite a lot of magic with conditional access, and it's becoming quite granular from an access point of view as well. So we've done a bit of a touch through on identity. Let's quickly go through endpoint management. So let's quickly clarify what that is. Endpoint security, practice of securing endpoints on users' devices. I'll let you read that, but the idea behind it simple is we want to make sure that the device you're accessing our data from in our company is actually secure enough and is managed so that it can't be hijacked or taken over by a bad actor so they can compromise data. So what are endpoints? We would typically think of desktop, worktop, laptops, smartphones, but any device where you can access information from that's on our corporate networks or will attach to the network or the environment you want to access is effectively an endpoint. So on the left, we have a couple of devices that you would expect. From the right-hand side picture, we've actually highlighted a couple other ones. Smart systems inside of a car. A Tesla has a internet-connected device, wearable watches, IoT devices that are sitting in field. These are all potential risk points because if they are connecting to our environment and they have authentication to get to data and I can get control of them, I effectively have a gateway. I'm creating a hole in the wall and walking straight into the building as that device. So protecting those endpoints is incredibly important. And there's one of the more vulnerable attack surfaces because on majority of times these endpoints are outside of our physical control and have left the office and we can't physically see them and protect them as you would. So why is protecting your endpoint important? We've covered a bit of it. Endpoints are the weakest link in our network because we don't have physical control. They're not locked down, they're not plugged in, they're not on the third floor in Mary's office. They have left the building, literally. So they are a big gap in our network posture. Remote work and bring your own devices, create a massive vulnerability as well, especially BYOD. If somebody's doing a bring your own device to work or is working remotely, they effectively have a scenario where they could have a compromised endpoint, and we want to make sure that that endpoint is protected and that we can take control of it and know what's happening on it and make sure it meets the requirements that our company has from a security perspective. A massive rise in the number of endpoint attacks. I was looking at the stats that came out about a year or two back, and there were close to 70% plus of attacks were actually from an endpoint perspective. We've seen quite a few of these type of examples, some a bit more public, where right down to people hacking devices inside of cars and taking control of a motor vehicle. Is an endpoint been hacked in a sort of a different type of way, but still shows the type of vulnerability. And one of the things why there's a rise in endpoint attacks is because we tend not to want to do that update, we'll rather postpone it. And we don't think because something is an IoT device, that is something that can be used to as an attack surface. And anybody who knows how these devices work know that it actually is incorrect. Hackers are being what hackers do. They are clever and they know where the attack surfaces are. That's just a generic statement when it comes to security in general. Bad people will do bad things and find better ways to do it all the time. We just make sure that we can block them as much as possible. And then last but not least, employee negligence and malice is a concern as well. Somebody who has access to the environment and data information on device, be it BYOD or even a company device, and leaves the business or decides not to come back, now has access to information that on their device locally, or potentially has access to the environment and could be malicious or negligent in their own way. We want to make sure that we have control of the device so we can mitigate that. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of sort of overflow from the different security aspects in the bigger picture, and this last little segment sort of also will rely on things like compliance being placed as well, to make sure not only is the device protected, but also we have application protection and data protection as part of the posture, so we can mitigate the risk from that perspective as well. So what does Microsoft Endpoint Protection do for you? What do we get from Microsoft perspective? I'll leave this on screen to read, but I'll just quickly talk through the different concepts, and then we'll do a bit of a deeper dive into some of them from a functional perspective. One, we want to be able to enroll devices. So when we have a device that is an endpoint that is going to be attaching to our network, we want to be able to enroll that device into our network so that we can know what's happening on it, decide what applications we potentially want to push through, and also look at things like provisioning applications and provisioning the security posture on that. So I'm not sure if any of you have had this scenario, but it definitely happened in our world quite often. I recently bought a new phone, dropped the other one, long story, we won't go into it. And as soon as I connected to my company network and added my Windows, my Microsoft 365 account, it insisted that I have a PIN on the device. And this is one of the things we can do from an enrollment point of view. Is when you enroll the device, we can then start pushing policies through. And this is where the configure part comes in. So once I've got the endpoint enrolled, I can then push things through like profiles, mandatory apps, device security policies, and device restrictions. So yes, you can log on, you can take your new Android phone or iPhone, you can add your Exchange account and OneDrive application, but then I'm going to insist that you enable PIN or MFA or some level of authentication so I know that device is protected. I might have a mandatory app because I want to push through antivirus for Android, so I'm going to insist that you have that app, and that's from the configure point of view. From a report and retire perspective, one of the things with bringing your own devices or devices that are out in the field, especially from a remote worker perspective, remote office, many times those devices never go through a retirement phase and we just end up sweating the asset. So we want to make sure from an endpoint point of view that when a device gets to the point where it can no longer be upgraded to a certain OS, or there is a security patch where it can no longer be applied, that we're able to actually revoke access from that endpoint to our corporate resources, potentially perform a selective wipe, and by selective wipe we mean remove the data that belongs to us, not the whole device, and potentially to retire the device or provide remote assistance. And that's part of the larger endpoint protection picture we have. And then last but not least, we want to protect data, so restrict access to corporate resources. on things like jailbroken device. And this comes back to the policies. So if the policy picks up there's a parameter that doesn't match, we can start going to a protection scenario. And then protect corporate data by restricting actions, so cut, paste, save as, etc. On the protect side, a good example of a protect scenario is I have a document that has corporate IP. Let's say it's a latest price list that is company confidential. From a compliance point of view, we've picked that up already. So we've added a sensitivity policy to that document. The device, you open that document on your tablet because it's part of a OneDrive or a SharePoint location. That device then respects the policy you've applied from a compliance point of view. And on the device says if you open up a document marked as top secret from a sensitive point of view, you're not allowed to cut and paste, or you can cut and paste into another Office document that is also part of your network, but I can't cut and paste into WhatsApp and send it off to a competitor, for instance. So that's where the protect service kicks in. Let's have a quick look at a little bit more around the enroll side. So on the enrollment side, we can look at company managed devices, employee managed, and also third-party applications as well. We use Intune device management and Intune application management for the enrollment side. And I'll quickly step through very briefly on some of the aspects. So you can enroll devices for management. So as a device gets attached to network, actually enroll it, look at the device, see if it meets all the criteria for what we regard as a managed device is compliant, and then bring it in and it's enrolled. Once it's enrolled, it's effectively available for me to manage and look at. I can provision settings on the device. So in the Windows or Mac environment, I could potentially push through firewall settings. On a mobile device, I might want to look at security settings. Once the device is managed, I can report and measure the device. I can see when the device has been used, what applications have been used, when it's on, where it is physically. And in the worst case scenario, I might have a scenario where the person's left the organization or the device is compromised, but it's still on, and I can remove corporate data without affecting the actual device itself. On the Intune app management side, be able to publish mobile apps to users. So if I am using let's say a scenario where I'm using a iPad as a check-in visitor registration for my organization. Most of us have seen those in the reception areas. I can publish certain apps through to it. I can configure and update apps. The idea there is to keep them up to date from a security perspective, reported app usage, and secure and remove corporate data within those mobile applications as well. So the enrollment is not only for a Windows laptop, but it's basically any device that connects, and it can either be company managed devices, bring your own devices, or even third party like kiosk or contract devices when people join the organization and attach to our corporate network. On the configure side, we're able to use Intune to configure profiles. So the profile configuration looks at the type of endpoint that we're connecting to, and based off the input we get from that endpoint, I can look at create the custom configuration or have a standard configuration for that device. So it could be as simple as, if a device is an Android device, this is the Android configuration for all devices. Or I can step down further and say Android device with this version of the Android OS that is company managed, has a company managed Android device profile, and I can push that through. So it isn't a one fit for all. We can be quite granular when it comes to what type of profiles we configure and how we work across different device categories. There isn't a one shoe fits everything. And that allows us to be quite specific with contractor devices, Android versions where the operating system might be slightly older, same with iPad, and also looking at the different nuances that you have with different physical devices as well. So very flexible, and definitely something that if you want to have a look at, we can arrange as part of the workshops that we run. Next is endpoint security policies as well. So we want to make sure that we control security policies when it comes to the endpoint devices. This specific is looking more at the Windows and Apple ecosystem. So if I have a device joined to the network, I want to be able to make sure that that the device is compliant or has everything on the endpoint that protects it. So does it have antivirus? Do I have disk encryption? Is a firewall enabled? And this policies can then be pushed down to those endpoints, and in certain cases, depending on the device, we can actually then automatically script and enable those features, and even push through software that we need to run on those devices. A great example of, and I'll use Fusion 5 because we're like to use what we sell. As soon as you add a new device to the network, and we're actually moving into the fully automated onboarding at the moment, it will set your different, we'll set the firewall perimeters. It will make sure that our antivirus software that we use is pushed through, and there's a couple of actual different management softwares that we use internally as well that are pushed through to your device based on the policy we have. Cool. Then on the mobile application side, mobile apps, we're looking at being able to have a endpoint manager for mobile devices, and this is where we can provide app protection policies. So on mobile device, typically, either you have a company-owned device, or you have a device of your own. A lot of us use our own devices because it's a preference, but the data and applications we need are still company-owned. So in this case, we can ensure that certain applications, based on how you're logged on, are ring-fenced as corporate applications, and the data produced by them is regarded as corporate data. And this is where the Microsoft Endpoint Manager for App Management works in. So it's app-level rules that you can manage and protect your organization's data on the actual device. This doesn't affect other applications. So the applications you use, Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., aren't affected. We aren't manage those. But what we can do is say that any corporate data inside of a Word document, for instance, as they have in this example, cannot be shared with applications outside of the policy that we've created. And these app policies can be provided across the board to Android, iOS, and Windows 10 devices. And then let's quickly, I think our second last slide before we go into Q&A is compliance policies. And this is looking at the endpoint and saying, does the endpoint comply with the rules that we expect from a device? So device configuration, device settings. So does the device have a PIN? As an example, is the device encrypted? Is it a jailbroken device? So if I am attaching to the corporate data with my iPhone and it's been jailbroken, so I could sideload an app, that is a potential risk because I might have been hacked and a bad actor sideloaded an application that's going to try and infiltrate my network. So I can say, fine, that device is not a verified device. I don't accept jailbroken devices on my network, and I'll put in a restriction and not allow them in. Same from operating system point of view. Is the operating system at a minimal spec? A lot of we see on a regular basis from an ID perspective, information coming through from the different vendors around updates. I'm a big Android user. My Android device gets quite a few updates during the month. Majority of those updates are a security enhancement. They never tell you what it is, but it's security and not an OS update. So we, from an organization point of view, can say, fine, we'll have a compliance policy that says if you are on Android version X and you do not have this patch, we will not allow you in because we know there's a vulnerability. So we can actually create a policy around OS integrity. Same with app integrity. Are you using the latest version of the app? Are you using apps that are restricted? Are you using apps that we are blacklisted? Are you using apps that we are aware have been compromised and regarded as bad actor apps? And if so, if you have those apps, you have a potentially compromised device and we won't let you in. And then verification if a device at a certain threat level. So looking at things like what type of software it's got on it, health of the device, and a whole bunch of different parameters. We can actually create a threat level count for that device, and then based on that also restrict access or deny access or limit access to applications in the background into our corporate data. And last but not least is looking at Microsoft information protection. So this is something I alluded to earlier as well, where there's crossover between compliance and information protection and endpoint. So even though we sort of treat them as three different areas you look at from a posture point of view, there is a massive merge. The picture on the right-hand side is the Security Compliance Center inside of Microsoft 365. And this is where we've defined labels we're going to use to create sensitivity labels on data and define retention. Oops. So in that scenario, we want to make sure that whatever device is using it respects those information protection policies. And this is where Microsoft information protection on the device kicks in. So the policies I've defined here from an endpoint point of view, when the endpoint will respect those policies and on the device will you'll look at those labels and apply whatever the protection is for those labels on that device and not allow that you to compromise the data, access the data, or share the data in a negative way, and will also allow you to then do remote wipe and remote data cleaning if you think the device is compromised. So from a next steps point of view, I'm going to quickly push through into the slides, is where do we go from here? We're offering, as a combination with Microsoft, this is a joint Microsoft Fusion 5, we're offering to our clients a full look at the Microsoft Security Compliance Identity Workshops. Microsoft provide 4 different workshops. They either can be done individually, depending where you are in the organization from a security standpoint, or as a holistic for all up approach. So we offer security workshops, identity workshops, compliance workshops, and endpoint management workshops, either as individuals or one collective. If you're interested in these, you can get hold of us. We'll drop up a QR code in a moment where we can actually look at engaging with you and potentially seeing if there's any way this can be funded from a Fusion 5 Microsoft perspective as well. We're also offering our Office 365 Health Check at the moment, which is a comprehensive look at your tenant, where you run through a tool that we've built as bespoke that looks not only at your security posture across your tenant, but also looks at things like your license management and where you're using licenses where you shouldn't, or where there are licenses that could be potentially costing you money that you don't need. And that is a license review optimization offer. There is that offer at the moment on Office 365 Health Checks that will tie back into the security and compliance posture in your organization. So that said, Gareth, I'm going to put this QR code on the screen. If you have any questions or like to provide feedback, we will send you a link out, but you're welcome to scan the QR code and we will we can just do a digital feedback. I think we'll open up for Q&A now, Darren. Gareth, is that okay?
Thanks, Troy. So I've got the first question here from Sarah. Can I see if someone is working from home or in the office?
Yep, absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly hit the non-sharing button so I can see what you see as well. Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the upsides when it comes to conditional access. So in Fusion 5, give me a second. Not only we're having technical problems today, but we seem to be having problems with me actually getting power to my laptop. So before
Apologies, everyone. We'll have him back online in a minute there.
I will be back. Sorry about that. There we go. A lot better. Yeah, so you can configure policies. Oh, here we go. Okay.
I can hear you all right there, man. Yeah.
Yeah. You can configure policies that look at IP ranges. So you can say with anything inside of this IP range is my office. And as soon as it's outside of that IP range, you can then
say that's okay. That somebody's not there. They're not in the office. They've left. So we can make an assumption they work from home, and then you can have additional look and say, is this IP range which is public in New Zealand? And that is something that is an international standard. So yeah, they're not in the office. They're in New Zealand, so there's a good chance they're working from home or external.
Thanks, Troy. And final question here is MFA on all the office plans from Michael.
Yeah, so for MFAs on majority of the plans, I think it's only on some of the lower business plans where we need to double check. But if you are one of the business premium or any of the E SKUs and the SKUs for education, yep, absolutely. Microsoft come to the party really well with things like MFA. So instead of saying, well, you need to go and pay a bucket load of cash for MFA, they've just made it available as a default. So they've sort of brought that first level security posture in play as something for their clients. So I would definitely say that is the number one thing. If you don't have MFA enabled, like you say, just do it.
Thanks, heaps, Troy. So that's it for our questions. Thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to our presenter, Troy. I know you put a lot of work into these, and it's appreciated as well, mate. So as mentioned, we'll be sharing a recording of today's session as well as answers to the Q&A. But if you do have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to get in touch directly as well with Troy or via our website. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.